media. We're live currently on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, my personal page, my company page, and Twitter. And I'm here with three very special people and friends. So Rebekah Taussig, who is an author, a professor, and she runs this amazing Instagram profile, this page called Sitting Pretty. She has a book by the same name. I have it on audiobook and absolutely love it. And so to learn more about her, all the description are below for all the guests I have right here. And then we have Dr. BJ Miller, who is a palliative care doctor. I met BJ in December 2016, even a little before I met Gustavo, actually. And BJ founded Mental Health, which is a consultation service here for you in sickness and in health. Definitely check it out. Mentalhealth.com. You can follow him on Twitter at BJ Miller MD. Last but not least, Gustavo Serafini also is an entrepreneur based in Florida. He's the co-founder of Pure Audio Video. Check out their website. I'm sure you want to be every single home they've built in the past. So we're all gathered here, and today's topic is on something I've never ever done before on this podcast, and it's very meaningful. It is on, disability and body neutrality. And I thought about the intro, and it was really, for some reason, I really struggle with this as well, because we're all in front of Zoom and we kind of are all the same, right? So, so thank you so much for being here with me, guys. I can't wait for the stories to unfold. So, all right. So do I have to throw out the first question, I guess? So, it's so funny. Before we went live, everybody was talking and I started talking and now nobody's talking. All right. So Rebekah, we all started with you because what happened was BJ shared an article that was of yours that published on Times. I started reading it and I realized, wow, that's really fascinating because I've been doing some of the things wrong in my life. So I'm here to learn, I think. And I want other people to open up and hear this as well. And then at the same time, Gustavo, for the first time ever, to say, Faye, if you're going live with Rebekah and BJ, I want to be there. So that's why we're all here. So Rebekah, could you maybe talk to us a little bit about your journey and what made you want to publish that book? And I shouldn't be the only person asking questions. Just actually pretend I'm not even here.
Thank you for being the facilitator of bringing us together into this space, because this is pretty special already. I'm really happy to be here with all of you. So a few things about me, I guess. I've been disabled since I was 3, so most of my memory making life. I had cancer when I was really young, and got my first wheelchair when I was 6. And I spent most of my life in this disabled body without having language or a community to really process what that meant to me. And it wasn't until much later, well into my 20s, that I started reading actually academic work, disability studies, that kind of started offering this framework and sent me on this track of rethinking my whole life, like what my body meant to me and how it fit into the world and how it fit into my family, and just kind of rethinking a lot of experiences and my identity, essentially. So I started, when I was in graduate school, I started this tiny little platform on Instagram where I was writing, I guess what we call, or I've started calling, mini memoirs, because Instagram space is very tiny. So I was kind of prompted to rethink a memory or process a moment that I had experienced, and started writing about just living life in this particular body in a world that doesn't have a ton of representation of that body, or seems to oversimplify that body, and really wanted to get at the raw, complicated experience of that. And so started writing about it there. And I've been doing that for like 5 years now, which is time, blows my mind. But eventually that space started to feel, the limitations of that space started to feel even more confining. And I felt my muscles needing to stretch out beyond that tiny platform. So that's where the book came from, is it's sort of unfurling from that space and thinking about the themes that showed up on my online space, but with more room. And I think more time to settle in and chew on those ideas, and hopefully the book is something that will continue to unfurl as well. I don't think the book is like the end of that. If anything, I hope that it just prompts more conversations like the one planned for today. That this is just something for us to think through as a community, and what our bodies mean to us and can be, and what else they might prompt us to imagine for the world around us. So those are some things about me. And then I guess we've got some other interesting human beings on this screen as well that I would love to hear from some of that background information too.
Gentlemen.
Gustavo, do you want to go next, bud? Or shall I jump in?
Go for it. Or, you know what? I'll go next, and then we'll save the best for last.
Okay.
So it's an honor to be here. A little bit about me and my background. So when I was two, when I was born with PFFD, which is proximal focal femoral deficiency. So basically, one arm is a shortening of the femur, and my right hip was fused. In 1976, there were only about 12 cases that had been documented. So, my parents, my dad was a doctor, and he, researched, should we move to Japan? Should we move to Canada? And this whole adventure, we ended up coming to the US so that I could get treated, figure out how I can best, adapt to the world and live in it. And thankfully, it's been an interesting experience. I never really had a lot of friends with disabilities. It was always just kind of, normal kids growing up and doing my thing. And I think what I tried to bring to the table is just to show people, focusing on ability rather than disability, right? This is what I can do. This is what I'm capable of. This is why I should fit in with you. Went to college, went to graduate school, law school. I'm a recovering academic, as they say. And for the last 15 years, I've been a co-owner in a business.
Well, beautiful. I'll jump in. So I'm BJ Miller. I am an amputee since I was 19, from electrical injuries in college, but I'd been around disability my whole life. My mother had polio as a child, and then post-polio syndrome. So she walked with crutches and used a brace for my early childhood. And then from the time I was about 7 or 8, she was using a wheelchair increasingly. And so much of my childhood, my mother and I are very close, and much of my childhood was spent in, just watching the world bounce off of my mom and learning a lot about the world, and being very, both often moved by what I was seeing, and also very troubled. And it just brought up for me big questions at a young age around identity, worth, belonging, transformation. And I couldn't help but wonder, watching my mom navigate the planet and knowing her, how it was always framed that she was the one who was lacking something, the disability. She was the anomaly. Something was wrong with her. That was all the language. That's how she was treated, etc. In the best case scenario back in the day, this was before the Americans with Disabilities Act, which I think helped our country begin to see disability issues through a civil rights lens, there's a lot to say about that. But before that, it was, if you got any attention around it, generally it was pity, or sort of repulsion, and those are related, I think. But anyway, and then I became disabled myself as an amputee, lost both legs and one arm in electrical burns, and joined the ranks myself. And then, so this became increasingly personal, these kinds of questions. Who am I now? What's my worth? What can I have to offer? And all throughout, of course, the thing that I had gained from an early childhood was that disability is not, first of all, it's framed in reference to something else, some standardized person who I don't know who these standardized people are, but it was, that your identity is framed by someone else, and that disability at best was something that one would overcome. And that always struck me as sort of a little off. And then I realized when I was in these shoes, it became to be clear why it was so off. That there's two, I can't overcome. This is my daily life. And nor would I want to. It's such a rich field. I've learned so much from being in these shoes. So altogether, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but altogether it became clear that no, this was something I wanted to work with, not overcome, not put behind me. And then I went into medicine as a place where I could exercise some of these lessons I was learning. So not only did I come to feel that disability was not only something that was tolerable in the world, but is something actually pretty important in the world for anybody to ponder. And I do think disability studies and this lens that we're describing here has a lot to offer the world in general, able-bodied, disabled, whatever. So sorry, I'll stop rambling there. There's a little bit of early thoughts, but that's what I've been trying to do and exercise in my work as a palliative care physician, that we don't fix ourselves, we work with what we have. We don't fix it, we use it, we work with it. Something like that.
Yeah, BJ, you've never ever rambled once. I know you mentioned that a few times. I
do, but okay.
Which is pretty incredible. I'm looking at two gentlemen, Gustavo and BJ. Both are so good at not mansplaining. It's incredible. And thank you for sharing your stories. I did practice the story several times, but I have to admit that I really struggle for some reason to introduce you, because I feel like I've exchanged several emails with Rebekah about our favorite TV show, Pen 15, and immediately felt like, she's a sister. I felt like I know all of you so well, and I start to see all of you with a very different lens for some reason. Like the emotion really starts to change. But I think what really triggered this conversation through, BJ's first share of Rebekah's article, and Gustavo and I really open up about PFFD for the first time in us knowing each other in 3 years, and volunteered to talk about it. Just felt so powerful because it was a territory I felt like I couldn't really get into. I should only be invited to talk about it. And as a result, I talked to other content creators who frankly feel like, oh, wow, I don't know how to ask these questions as a podcaster. As a YouTuber, I'm really afraid I'm going to offend someone. Therefore, maybe inaction is the way to go. But I really want to break that barrier because I feel like I much rather learn what I'm doing right or wrong. So.
Well, maybe there's a one point to jump in and some basics on there, Faye. I mean, from where I sit, it'd be interesting to hear everybody's thoughts on this, but I mean, some of the basics around languaging around disability, just in terms of almost like an etiquette. I think the standard now is, a person with a disability. So there's a person first, that I'm not just framed by disability. I'm a person, I happen to be disabled, I happen to have brown hair, among other traits. So there's a nice little basic lead in, and a lot flows from that kind of languaging. Handicapped has sort of somewhat fallen out of favor. I'm not even sure where the source of that word is. Crippled certainly is out of favor, except oftentimes I've heard disabled folks refer to themselves as crips, it's sort of a fun way to kind of own it. And it's our club, you can join the club, but you got to go get, something's got to happen to you first, and then you can come talk to us. But so there's some playfulness around that. But like any group, I think, or any person, and this is another thing with disability is, I suppose no group of people is homogenous, really, if you look closely enough. But certainly in the disabled world, we have much in common. And I think a lot of what we have in common is not so much the function and dysfunctions of our body per se, but how the world treats us. That seems to me to be the bond among folks I know who are living with disability, which is interesting because it points out that so much of the hardship of disability isn't the disabilities itself, it's the projection of others and this feeling that the world is excluding you. The built environment. Before the ADA, there were no guaranteed curb cuts, you had no guaranteed access to services, etc. So literally the world was not made for you. It's demeaning, it's debilitating. So that's some thoughts, and then one more to share, and then I'll shut up. But pity, I've mentioned this a little bit. Pity is really to watch yourself. If you feel pity welling up in you, well, okay, you can't control your emotions. That's okay, but that's really that's something that you need to examine. Because if you're feeling sorry for me, you're projecting something onto me. I don't feel sorry for myself. So if you're feeling pity, it's usually a call about anything. I would say it's a call for you to look inward. And it may be a normal response in some ways, but it also means you got some homework to do about checking yourself.
I think that's such a good point. I think that, like, Faye, I love that you open with that vulnerability of sharing that anxiety that you have. It's admirable to me that you would kind of open with that, and also it's relatable, because I relate to that in other contexts too. Like the fear of offending someone or making someone uncomfortable. It's in some ways it's a good impulse, because we want to care for each other and we don't want to harm each other. But also I think sometimes it ends up perpetuating harm, because it keeps us separated from each other, and we don't kind of avert our gaze or try to gloss over it, and there's an erasure in that. And so I really appreciate you acknowledging that. And I think, like BJ said, everybody in this community is different, so of course people will have different feelings about that. But I think by and large, acknowledging that sort of discomfort, but also stepping forward anyways, and leading with openness and curiosity and a desire to learn, I think it's hard to go wrong with that. And if you do, I think if there is kind of moments of discomfort for either party, I think that's sort of the toll that we pay for trying to get closer to each other and trying to figure this out together. There's a messiness with it. And I think acknowledging that can be messy, and that there can be things that like language that might be used that someone's like, well, that's not a term that I appreciate. That's maybe recognizing that that's not necessarily about you in that moment. It's just about the learning process, and even like the language thing that BJ mentioned, it's interesting because I think that's just like an example of how complicated this can be, because I think person first language is definitely part of a movement that we're moving towards in the disability community. But I've also heard of the say the word kind of leaning towards say the word. It's I think it's even a hashtag people use, like say the word, and it means that some people like to identify as disabled person instead of person with a disability, and that part of sort of claiming that as an identity. And like BJ mentioned, some people are claiming the word cripple, but who gets to use that in what context? Like it's a complicated, messy thing. And I think sometimes we have this feeling like we need to know all the rules before we proceed, and that's just impossible. That's just not, I don't think that is a possible way to proceed. But proceeding with care and curiosity and acknowledgement and honesty, I think that is possible. Like that's a way to move forward. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you all said. And again, Faye, thank you so much for taking this bold step forward and opening up this space. I just took a really interesting workshop recently on Sonder. Do you all know what that word means? It's from the person who invented it is from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. And the word Sonder means to recognize that everyone else around you is a whole person with insecurities, flaws, dreams, hopes, and it's just the ability to try to see the other person as a complete human being who shares many of the same things that we share. So So instead of, as long as we're approaching people with curiosity, like you said, Rebekah, I mean, that's exactly what it is. Curiosity. I want to learn. I want to understand how you see the world, how you are, who you are, what you care about. I mean, anytime I meet anybody new, and a lot of people are like this, there's social awkwardness. You're getting used to the other person. You're getting to know the other person. That's all okay. It's like what you said, it's the messy part of being human. I try to start with, when people look at me like with pity or with, oh, are you in pain? Or that, I try to reframe that into, let's start with curiosity or hope or inspiration, because at least that's a better starting point for you to not fear me and start to see me as another human being, just like I'm trying to see you as another human being.
So beautifully said, because this conversation triggered a lot of thoughts, like early childhood thoughts that I think there's also a cultural element to me as well. For example, in China, you're supposed to you're taught to help people with certain disabilities, help them cross the street and things like that. And I think in a way I was conditioned to do it. And as soon as I got here, my friends will pull me away to say, you need to ask for permission first. So that was something really interesting for me to learn. And growing up, I also felt like there were a couple of kids in a huge school who had disabilities, who were in wheelchairs. And I always was the one who stood up to say, if you got a problem with her, well, you got a problem with me. And there I was 5'4" and like 110 pounds. And maybe that's why later on I studied martial arts for 20 years. But I always, for some reason, it just, to me, like at the time, I didn't fully understand that feeling. And now as an adult, I feel like there's so much to process, because like you said, Rebekah, but I assume you're younger than I am. And, in the 80s and even the early 90s, as a kid growing up, I really didn't have a lot of mentors, or people did not talk about it. It was a topic almost to be avoided, or, so I'm really grateful to be able to learn so much so quickly in this conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I think you're right. I think it is something that people feel a strong avoidance toward, in my experience, or have. I think there is momentum behind that, like discomfort and avoidance. And I'm curious about that. And I'm curious what folks with me here think about that too. Because to me, my experience as a disabled person is so very ordinary. It's like just the most basic human experience. There's nothing really that dramatic about it to me. And I think part of that is growing up that way, right? Like I think disability is experienced in different ways for different people, and sometimes getting a disability later in life might change that. But for me, it just feels incredibly ordinary. And I think a lot of what I came to process as I got older was recognizing how so often what made me start to feel different was these checks that I was getting externally from other people, letting me know that there was something different happening here, something sad, or something extra inspirational, just something that was different. And there was that distance, and I didn't feel that until other people were kind of like, I don't know, putting out those vibes toward me, and signaling that to me. But so I think there is a discomfort. And BJ, when I was listening to your TED Talk in particular, I started thinking, or sort of seeing this alignment with the theory that I've had in the past. And I wonder if you would think this is too dramatic or taking anything too far. But in some ways, it seems to me that the aversion to looking at and engaging with disability, like with eyes wide open, sometimes might have to do with fundamentally like an aversion to death, that fear of a body's frailties, or the fact that a body is going to age. And I don't know that would ever be like in somebody's mind directly, but there seems to be something almost guttural in that, that fear, that it's personal. So I don't know, what you guys think about that? But
I totally believe that. I think it is, there's a natural concern from people, and it's some of it I think is conditioned and learned, but I think some of it is older, more ancient than that, and I think it has to do very much with what you're describing. Our physical presence represents loss on some level to people. Loss. I mean, we can spend a lot of time reframing that, but on some level, I don't know that that's avoidable, and it's loss that could happen to them too. So it's very different from, say, race or ethnicity, other things that you're sort of born into. But especially with an acquired disability, I think we represent vulnerability. And vulnerability scares the pants off of people. And to give us all credit, that is a visceral, neurological, neurohormonal response. We are wired to run away from death. We are wired to feel uncomfortable around vulnerability and to try to strengthen ourselves around that. Those are some basic impulses in human beings. So I think a lot of what we bump up against is exactly what you're saying, Rebekah, is that we represent that vulnerability, and therefore we confront people with their own. And that's unnerving. So it also points back to so much of the homework for the population at large. And this is where self-awareness is so key. Ooh, sorry. Self-awareness is so key. And that's why, back to Faye, you owning your awareness around this is the thing. When I bump into people, as long as there's some basic respect and they're owning their position, then it's off to the races. We can go anywhere together. When they're posturing and all that stuff, it makes me I just kind of laugh. I think part of the response from me as a disabled person, when people project pity onto me, part of the reason I hate that is because I would look at folks and I'm like, what, you think you got it all together just because you have 4 limbs? Like, really? You have no problems. Your life's just easy peasy. Everything's working out fine. I mean, like, honestly, of course, because that's not really true for anyone. So when I meet that energy, I know that someone hasn't taken the time to look at their own vulnerabilities, their own relationship to mortality, et cetera. So it's a little bit of a tell. And the tell is mostly that they're not looking at themselves, and no one has all their shit together. We're just a little bit more obviously represent that sort of more obviously. Does that sound right to you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I think one thing that makes it interesting to me to think about, and I wonder how this piece fits in, is my siblings when I was growing up. And Gustavo, you have siblings that grew up with you with your disability as well. So I'd be curious to know how this compares to you. But it's interesting that I'm the youngest of 6 kids in my family. And so they grew up like right next to me with this disability. They were right there, like, especially my siblings that are just a couple of years older than me. And their reaction to my body is unlike any other relationship that I've ever had in my life, growing up right next to me. And I think part of what might be happening there is, like, BJ, you were talking about our bodies almost being like being like symbols of something. And I think that the closeness, I think kind of, if you would look at it like almost like a study, I think the closeness between me and my siblings is maybe capturing, I'm just thinking about this for the first time, so this is kind of clunky, coming out kind of clunky, but capturing like an authentic relationship to a disabled body in some ways, that you like lose that shorthand symbolism, and it's just like what it actually feels like to grow next to this disabled body, and suddenly it's just another body in the room, and it has frailties, but not necessarily inherently or fundamentally different than the frailties of any human body, really, when we start looking at it, right? So I don't know how that compares, Gustavo, to your experience growing up with siblings and their responses to your body, or not. That's just my experience.
It's similar and different. So I have a younger brother. He's 3 years younger. We were always very close. What I guess the thing that what I'm most grateful for with him is he was, he's athletic. He's, 6 feet tall. He was a high school basketball player. And what was really amazing about growing up with him is I love sports too. And he was able over time through, I think, imagination and observation to help me, right? If you're playing basketball, I know you can't move your body like I can, but why don't you try this? Why don't you do this instead? Why don't you navigate these obstacles in this other way? And that was, there's been very, very few people in my life who've had that ability to imagine and to help and to see kind of the environment in a different way. So that was my biggest takeaway growing up with him. Just that, I don't know if that's, empathy, compassion, all those things together, but it was incredibly special to have that relationship with someone.
And Gustavo, now he has 3 little kids. And you told me a week ago that you're learning a lot from dealing with children. Their filters being applied, but they're still going to ask you all these questions. You say we're able to learn a lot from that. Could you talk about that a little bit?
So I think, so growing up, if kids approached me in a disrespectful manner, you'd make up some story to scare them off and get them away. Now I think growing up with and being there with Marcelo's kids, they ask questions, like so many questions, right? And it's all, how come you were born with one arm? Why do you have to wear a prosthesis when you walk? And how come you don't, why do you do this? And they're coming at it from a place of curiosity and love. And I have grown a lot more comfortable. Like when you said, Faye, I'm scared of, I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want to say anything I shouldn't say. It's actually helped me tremendously to be that much more comfortable with however it is that other people see me. So it's been a transformative process.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I want to clarify, I feel like we are all different. I think when, for me personally, there's definitely a sense of fascination, be completely honest, of a body that's different than mine. And granted, like everybody's body is different than mine. And I had a lot of fear growing up too. I will bring that story up at another point, but a week ago, Gustavo said that, hey, Faye, let's hop on a call to prep for this. And one thing we talked about was when we met for the first time in a Seth Godin environment. By the way, this is being streamed to the official LTMBA group as well, that he felt so comfortable in front of 300 people. And so I said, well, what didn't make you feel, what kind of situation wouldn't make you feel comfortable? And Gustavo, if you remember, you talked about eye contacts and avoiding eye contacts and people are walking away from you. And believe it or not, I couldn't believe this has then happened to me in the past few days as I moved from, the Boston area to now Western Mass. I had no idea how, 40 minutes made a huge difference. In the past few days, I brought my mom to go grocery shopping. I noticed, like, I'm not kidding, like our presence probably tripled the Asian population in this particular area. I actually, for the first time living in Massachusetts for nearly 20 years, I felt uncomfortable because I noticed people they were staring at me and everything. As I'm walking back with bags of groceries, I noticed like these, people will turn and look at me until I get closer to my car. And men had a very different reaction than women. And some of them looked, frankly, a little bit scared. And I was like, does this have to do with like COVID? So I started creating all these different questions and imaginations in my head. But Gustavo, I felt like I now I worried a little bit. Like going grocery shopping becomes a very different experience to me. I felt a sense of protection towards my mom, like things like that. I don't know, like in an environment, I don't know what exactly is going to happen. So I wonder, does any one of you feel a certain way in a certain situation or a location? What should people do to really show the respect and to really, like you said, not to look at each other differently?
I think at least, I think it's a similar, well, you have to decide too, and it doesn't need to be one answer. It's like, how do you want to, sometimes you can play with it, you know, you could like say boo to people if they're staring at you, you know, there are ways to get playful. I went through a period after my injuries where I needed to get into this. So I started wearing like really short shorts, and my hair was like out to here. And I just started getting playful with I saw my body as this thing that I'm not, I am, my body's mine, but I'm not just my body, and I can work with it. I can play with it and treat it as sort of a raw material. That was very therapeutic for me, and maybe helpful for others, or at least entertaining to watch on some level. But anyway, I just offer that as for you. Now you're in the role in this way of the disabled person in the way we're talking in this community. You know, you can, for yourself, what do you want to do with that? Do you want to teach these folks something? Say, hey, I noticed you're staring. You never ever met an Asian person? You can take it on yourself to teach folks. You could take it on yourself to shock folks. You can do anything you want. I mean, the first thing is to realize your freedom and your agency in this. And that may be a little pat, because there may be times where you don't feel safe. I don't want to just be glib about that. But anyway, one beginning of a response would be to say, find a way to own it and play with it or work with it or use it yourself. And that's a comment. What do you guys think?
It's so exhausting, though. I mean, I imagine you coming back from that trip, and I don't know, I don't want to project onto you, but I'm thinking of, for me, being in public sometimes it's just exhausting when you are the spectacle. And I actually had similar phases, BJ, with the for me it was just like fashion and my hair. I like bleached my hair all white for like a decade, and just wore the most outrageous sweaters. I don't know, just almost like trying to become a spectacle before someone could make me the spectacle, I guess. So that definitely resonates with me. But in terms of if we were to flip it and think about the starers, and think about that positioning, I think that the thing about being the one difference in the room, I guess, or the visual difference in the room, is that this sounds so obvious, but like your perspective is the only one of its kind, and then everybody else is sort of operating from the default perspective. And I think sometimes that's so natural. If you're used to being of the majority and you're used to being the person that blends in, it's so natural to just sort of stay in that mindset or in that space. And I think it takes intentionality and it takes like a decision to decide to think about the perspective that's not your own. And to think about what it feels like to be that person in the room. So I'm thinking even beyond staring. I mean, I think hopefully staring is something that we can catch ourselves and stop ourselves from doing. But even just thinking about, for me, so I'm operating I'm in a wheelchair, and so I'm moving through a room like 2 feet lower than most people in the room. And so I think even sometimes it's really easy to like look over me or talk over me. So if I'm in a big room, it means a lot to me, and I notice the people who think about what I would be experiencing in that room. So somebody who like kneels down to talk to me so that we're eye level, or grabs a chair to talk to me so that we're eye level, is a person who's thinking about what I'm experiencing in that moment a little bit, you know. And a lot of people don't have to take that extra thought and think about it, you know. If you are used to moving through a space as the norm, a lot of times you've never had to take that extra step to think about it. So I guess for me, that would be one thing, is just to notice the people that are in a space with you and just take an extra step to think how they might be experiencing that space with you.
Mm.
Mhm.
It's super helpful and just fascinating. And for me, it just I'm learning more about myself, my environment, because I went from going to high school in Maine, where literally there were 5 Asian people in that town of 20,000 people, to Boston. That I haven't felt like I've been noticed by anyone anywhere for 20 years, and all of a sudden, like people can pick me out. So. Gustavo, I know you have a ton of questions. I hate to call you out. So come on, it's your opportunity.
All right. Well, I was letting everyone have their say. I have a question for Rebekah and BJ. I don't know if we need to. Maybe Rebekah, you can, for the audience who haven't read the book. You spoke a lot about the medical model and the social model. The first question that I have there is there anything in the literature? Is there like a third model that's being proposed, or are those the 2 major ones that are being worked on and thought about?
Oh, that's a great question. There are other models. And now I feel like I should have studied before this. Like, I feel like I'm like defending my dissertation again. There are other models, and I'm trying. Alison Kafer is a disability scholar who has proposed a more complicated model that has to do with social and political experiences in the world as well, that kind of brings that into the fold. And then there are also models that think about disability and bring in the sensory experience of disability more, which also reminds me a bit of some of the stuff that I've heard BJ talk about in terms of just what it means to live in a body and experience the world, even just through one sense, or kind of thinking through I'm thinking about an image describing a disabled person who doesn't communicate through language, but has the ability to kind of wiggle a hand. And if you put a paintbrush in that person's hand and put a paper up against that and see what's created from that expression, thinking about just thinking about the human body in a different way and with different hierarchies in mind. And I don't remember the name of that one, but yes, there are other models. I think that the medical and social model, one of its strengths is one of the strengths of those models is the simplicity of them. They kind of break things down in a really black and white way. And that's also its limitation, because of course, real experience is always tangled in between those 2 spaces. I don't know if it'd be helpful really quickly. I can just talk briefly about the social and medical models, because I don't know if whoever's listening would be familiar with that. But the very, very basic kind of bottom building blocks of a lot of disability studies has to do with the difference between the medical model and the social model. And the medical model would be what we have kind of a more typical way of thinking about the body in this place and time, which is to think about disabled bodies as being the individual problem that needs to be fixed, and really focusing on that body that needs to be overcome in some way. And then the social model thinks about the experience of that disabled body and looks at disabling experiences more than the disabled body. So thinking about the environments that create moments of pain and suffering for disabled body. So the difference, like a really simple example would be a woman sitting at the bottom of a flight of stairs, and the medical model would look at that scene and say, oh, that poor disabled woman and her broken body. And the social model would look at that scene and say, oh, well, like, why would we not build a ramp in an elevator, and then problem solved? So that is a really simple beginning way to think about the difference between focusing on a broken body that is made less because it's disabled, and then thinking about these environments and social understandings of bodies that are disabling experiences. But yes, Gustavo.
So then the complicated question that I have from there is this. I want to hear from both of you, but as you know, BJ, as a doctor, right? Where can we say that the medical model that Rebekah just described is correct? Like, what's worth salvaging there? If we turn and say, wouldn't it be great if we could cure all diseases, and then feeling so miserably with seeing people with disabilities as a defect that has to be fixed versus something that can contribute positively to the world? Like, where's the disconnect happening there?
Well, so right on. So each of these, I've heard each of these models and others are helpful, right? But to a point, and they, by definition, you define, you pick a word for or a construct, you're by definition abandoning other words and other constructs. So part of the trick here is for us to understand that these are constructs that are invented that help us make sense, but they're approximations of reality. I mean, in this way, so medicine in the medical model has something to offer. It's not an entirely bankrupt thing, or it's a useful thing, because it turns out sometimes a disability is a problem and the experience is problematic, and sometimes there's actually a fix for it. So like if there were some breakthrough that allowed people to sprout limbs, would I do that? You know, it's an interesting question. I wonder how you'd answer it, Gustavo. I'm not so sure. I certainly wouldn't leap at it. Depends how functional those limbs are, et cetera, et cetera. And if I had to give up the lessons I've learned by being in this body. But I guess to answer your question more narrowly, sometimes, you know, we don't have to spin disability out of, sometimes it's freaking problematic, just like life in general. And when there's a fix, I'm all for it. The problem with the medical model is not that is what it does when you're not fixable or don't want to be fixed. That's where the medical model breaks down and abandons people. And that's its major flaw, is it substitutes its model for its all-encompassing reality, and then therefore leaves so many people out. And this is where people later in life, in the palliative care and hospice, my fields are sort of correctives to swoop in and offer a place to hold people who are falling through these cracks, these structural cracks, who are no longer relevant. If my problem's no longer fixable, then I'm not really relevant to the medical model. So the work in palliative care is meant to expand that and to link to other ways of seeing in other models. But a narrow answer to your question, Gustavo, is medical model is great because sometimes things are fixable, and I might want that. That's okay. Just the problem is, don't substitute any one of these constructs for a total view on reality. That's where it all breaks down.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think I'm alive because the medical model said, hey, there's like this tumor wrapped around your spine and we can fix that, you know, like, thank God. I'm really grateful for that. I think to me, yeah, I would totally agree. I think to me, the medical model, if the idea is that we will do anything in order to make your body look as close to this imagined ideal or normal default body as possible at the expense of joy or fulfillment or being able to be present in your life. I mean, I think sometimes the medical model takes that as takes the goal of that ideal or normal body as the obvious goal, when there are so many different parts of being a human being. And for me, I suppose if my parents had been like more rigorous and like made physical therapy my number one priority as a child, and I had spent, you know, like a full-time job in physical therapy as a child, I might have a little bit more mobility than I have now. I'm kind of glad that that wasn't what my childhood was, you know, like I'm kind of glad that I got to like roll around in the mud and like make magic potions with my siblings and have that freedom. And I, you know, I get along in my chair pretty well. So I guess I love the way that you described that, BJ, that like anytime we adopt one of these models, we're also losing other things, right? Like it's almost like a pair of glasses that we can pick up just to look at something in a new way, not as if that's the only way we should ever look at it.
Yeah. And that's so much the human capacity and potential, is that we can't change the world, but we can change how we look at it, in sort of simple terms. And you can switch out your glasses, but on a different lens. And I think we'd all benefit from realizing that each of us has that power. We can look at reality through various lenses, and we can change those lenses. They're alterable. That's the hazard of substituting any of these models with a totality of reality. But that's the bigger problem.
So there's a common theme in all of your writing, as I noticed recently, and Gustavo brought it up as well. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, which is design thinking and the exercise of imagination. That's a commonality, and it's just very fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was actually taking notes, BJ, on the second time or third time that I watched your TED Talk, because I just can't get enough of it. I am I'm making my partner watch it with me again later this week. But that was what stood out to me so much too, is the imagination part and the play and the creativity, that I think with death and disability, there is sort of this acceptance, like there's only one way to look at it, and that is a terrifying, horrifying thing that I'm going to do my best to pretend like doesn't exist, and then that's it. But it's also an inevitable part of life. And when we bring that in to the center and we allow that to be a part of our existence, I think that there is so much untapped potential for rethinking the way we interact with the world and how we see ourselves and what we let ourselves experience. And in the tiniest example, and the most tangible tiny example, we see that with disability and curb cuts or closed captioning. As soon as we think, well, what would it be like to actually bring a disabled body into the middle of this experience and think about how we could include that experience in the center, suddenly we're like, oh, there's other ways to engage. There's other ways to participate in this world. And now not only does the wheelchair user get to use that curb cut, but so do parents with strollers and people on bikes. And not only do hearing impaired people get to see what's happening on the screen or participate in the screen, but now so can people who are at work and don't want the video to project into the workplace and have anyone know that they're watching the video. There's just so many places where I think we can open up and have more people participating in more ways. And how fun is that? I totally feel that in the things that I've heard you talk about, BJ, and I think that's so exciting. I think it's a really exciting place to be.
Me too. I find it thrilling. I mean, some of the thoughts that have helped me and that touch on design thinking, but also touch on modeling, Gustavo, which is our sort of structural ways to look at things. It's been very helpful for me to see my disability and every aspect of my life as variations on a theme, rather than that we're uniquely having different experiences. Okay, we might have different experiences, but there is a commonality underneath all of it. And I really think it's very useful to ping between the individual and the shared, and the unique and the shared. So, and also just making sure to craft a worldview that includes you and everybody else in it and anything that might happen to you. So seeing disability as a variation on a theme, like Faye, you may not qualify as a disabled person, but we can, in a design thinking way, we can reframe the issue as not disability, that's a word. What is the issue? Maybe the issue is vulnerability, like we talked earlier. There's something that everyone shares, whether they're willing to admit it or not, is a different story. But through some simple reframing, you can find yourself in very rich territory and very inclusive territories. Mm-hmm. And that is a creative exercise, finding words, creating words. So I find it it's been very helpful see this as a variation on a theme that we all go through. It's also very helpful to see things on a spectrum. So it's not like disabled people over here, able-bodied people over there, again, wanting to sort of demand sort of inclusion here. Aren't we all on a spectrum? There's no independent person. You can be relatively independent, but there's no one in the world who needs no one. And that's a really important refinement. When I used to be independent and then I became disabled. And so the feeling was I had to leave one world and go to another, but that's just not accurate. And it's not very inspiring either. The truth is we're all in various modes of dependencies throughout our lives. We move on the spectrum that every single one of us is on. So these are sort of creative ways of revisiting things and welcoming more people into the mix. And then the third piece that's related to this is coming to appreciate how important in the human experience limitations are. So you start looking at us as a species. I love thinking about myself, comparing myself to my dog. If you threw Maisie and me out in the woods, who's going to win that one? We humans, we need clothing, we need all sorts of things. We're not a very impressive species, but for our minds, but for our perspectives and our ability to think creatively. That's where we as a species rise, not out of having 4 limbs versus 2 or whatever. So thinking about the basic human experience as being one responding to limitations, and then all of a sudden disability becomes a spark, something that gets people or their creative juices flowing. You might follow the language around disability. You'd think all disabled people are just sort of in pain and sort of in a corner and can't do anything. Of course, the truth is because they've had to find workarounds and work-throughs, they are also incredibly creative. They may not use that language or think of themselves in that way. But anyway, my long-winded way of saying here is, from a design point of view, as well as modeling, is seeing limitations as essential to the creative process. And therefore, if not loving them, at least appreciating them. And that often opens up a lot of creative juice for myself and others.
I love the word limitation as it relates to creativity. I think the first time that clicked for me was there's an art teacher at our school who did this exercise with the other teachers where he had us draw he had us draw a cat. And he gave us a minute to draw a cat. And so everybody is like getting the whiskers just right. And then he was like, okay, now draw the cat in 30 seconds. And so everybody's like trying to do it faster and faster. And then he gave us 10 seconds, 5 seconds, and then 3 seconds. And a lot of times what you'll find is like something between 5 and 3 seconds, suddenly there's like this amazing, weird looking cat that was created out of that limitation where it wouldn't have been before. And so then you start thinking about things like poetry. Poetry is a form that only exists because of limitation. We decide that actually we want this number of syllables and we want this rhythm and we want this structure. And suddenly there's a poem that wouldn't exist if we were like, just put all the words wherever full access to however you want to use language. So, and the same is with music. Like when we bring limitation into our experience of the world, that's when like new things that never would have been considered can blossom and bloom. And so I love that word limitation and reframing what that can mean.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I love what everyone said. I tend to use the word constraints instead of limitation, just because I like to think of them as a lot of them are imagined. We think they're there, but they're not really there. So what can we actually push through? What can we actually work around? In my business, in my industry, working with high-end clienteles, architects, designers, I see a profound lack of imagination for various reasons. And I think that a lot of it has to do with it's cultural, right? We are champions of industry, not of craft, even like to think otherwise. It's more, better, faster, cheaper, as opposed to mastery and how can I do this better and how can I take the time to make something that's truly special or imaginative, or why can't our kitchen shelves come down to us? Why do we have to go up to them? Like, it doesn't seem like that hard of a problem to solve. Why has nobody done it yet? To me, it's cultural. It's a cultural limitation that we just put on ourselves because we've always climbed the step ladder to go get it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that spark. I mean, I think, you guys are reminding me of one of the favorite moments. It hasn't happened in a while, but invariably when I talk to kids are really interesting to watch around disability. Just to kind of spark and how we all use this normalcy as a crutch to hide behind, and how it squashes creative thinking, just like you illustrated, Gustavo. I love these moments. So a kid will ask me, "Don't you miss having two hands?" And I hope it happens today when this happens. But I'll say, "Well, yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, two hands was cool. I miss my hand, but don't you miss having three?" And invariably, some kids are like, "What?" Like I'm nuts. But sometimes a kid or an adult will get the point. The point is like, what's your frame of reference here? And again, we have the potential, we have the ability to contextualize. We can say what the frame of reference is. We can make ourselves as normal as apple pie or as abnormal as whatever, just through our constructs. We have that freedom as human beings. And so I love that charge to people. Faye, aren't you you must be bereft that you don't have 6 limbs, you poor thing. I think it's just a very useful way to get you out of all the assumptions that go in and get in the way of creative thinking.
Yeah, I read that in an article somewhere. I love that. And especially I couldn't just imagine being myself in that classroom, kids just being shocked with their mouth open and just don't know what to say. It's incredible. So yeah, Gustavo, I know you're bubbling with like all of these thoughts and ideas. You're so energetic with me like a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
Am I not being energetic now?
No, I love it. We had this little plan of Gustavo had such incredible questions. He was like, "Faye, anything you're afraid to ask, I can ask the questions for you." It hasn't worked out so well. Yeah, but this is really amazing. I know I booked 75 minutes in case there's any delay, and we still have a few minutes to wrap up and to respect everybody's time. I still have a question, which is, I know that, content creators ask me sometimes, and, to be quite honest, like, for example, BJ, when other people interview you on, including NPR and all that, like when people ask you to repeat your origin story and like the day after, to be honest, like I started to feel like I felt a little offended. I know I'm projecting my own feelings again, but I felt like wouldn't it be nice or appropriate to actually check with the person and to say how I would like to be introduced? And maybe, I don't know. I think you know where I'm going with this. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a mixed feelings around it. On the one hand, especially, for me, I'm trying to be out in the world on behalf of issues around suffering and illness and death, and maybe shifting healthcare and some other things. So I'm out there on behalf of issues, and I have to realize that part of why people will listen to me has something to do with my story, has something to do with this body, that I've lived some of the things I'm talking about, et cetera. And so I accept that it's part of the fare that people need to know the story. It's a way in to what can be really hard and quickly abstract constructs. So fine. Okay. I don't really mind so much as that it unfortunately can end up just sucking so much wind that we don't get to the things that I'm trying to get to. This is on behalf of some other things. So sometimes I get a little upset that it's just a question that's been asked a gazillion times. I don't mind being asked. I mind when the interviewer just stays there. That's where it's like, and I need to get a little bit better about commanding that. I'm still feel novice with media, and so I just basically respond to whatever people are asking. I think I need to get a little bit more politically savvy and and answer the question I want them to ask me, not the one they ask me. But back to your question, yeah, it's annoying to a point. But the point is that it ends up interrupting or getting in the way of, not facilitating, getting in the way of bigger conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So BJ, how have you, so my question that, Faye was prodding me to ask, but I think you've answered it already in many ways, but how do you, as this master of creating these spaces, of holding these spaces for people with surrounding death, illness, etc., have you gone back to, you say, your 13-year-old self, your 15-year-old self, and use that as a way to help, able-bodied people better understand or open up or project less as to what it's like for you and what you have to teach and, bring to the table?
Interesting. I haven't per se, but as you say that, I do think, and I haven't sort of named it, but I think one of the things that qualifies me to do the work I'm doing is I'm straddling a lot of worlds, like the medical world with the medical and the social models, for example, or palliative care is something of a misfit in healthcare. I'm always stumbling on the periphery. I feel like I'm straddling worlds, and I feel like in this way I'm an usher. I sort of link things in some ways. And I think maybe what qualifies me in this way with patients and families is not only that I've come close to death and I've lost body parts, that I've been a patient, that I've been in the bed, as I say. But as you say that, I realize it also calls that I had life before being in the bed. And I think it's both, that I have a line of sight on both of those experiences. That is what helps me do my work. So I haven't thought about it until you just said that, Gustavo, per se, but I think I will start using that a little bit more. I think I naturally just do that without thinking about it. But I'm going to take your question to heart and ponder it some more, because I do think I'm qualified for these conversations because I'm disabled, and I'm qualified for these conversations because I've been able-bodied. It's both.
Wow. This is incredible. I'm so grateful. And so I don't want this to wrap up. As a project manager for over a decade, when a meeting ends at 5:15 could easily carry on. But with that said, and respecting your time, and I don't think this is participation. This is like more of a, for me, this is coaching and learning as well. So any last thoughts, things that you wish that we brought up but didn't?
Well,
I don't have any. Sorry. You go ahead, because I was just going to say I don't have any, except mostly I'm just really, I think you all, like everyone on this screen, is so cool. And I'm so glad to connect with you. This is really, really fun for me. So that's all I was going to say.
Next time, or if we can do it now, great. But in your book, Rebekah, you like when you described your early childhood of like playing in the mud, and for me, this is not an exaggeration, okay? But I read Dante, right? I've read a lot of religious and spiritual works. To me, that was the most, my childhood was not like that, but it felt like the most believable description of what heaven could be like, right? If it existed. I'm not religious per se, but it was really, and so when you look back on those moments, like, how do you feel that you could bring more of that into the world around you? That's my question.
My heart is doing some swelling and breaking. It's really, really, man, I feel a lot of tenderness around that. And I love that you connected so much with that moment, because to me, when I read the book out loud for readings, or when I did the audiobook, there's a line in the book when I talk about those memories, and I talk about how sacred that space was for me and those memories are for me, and how I'll never be able to get back to that exact space. And that's one of the moments that I like always cry in when I read the book, because and I never really thought of it as being sort of like a heavenly space, but I have used the word sacred, and I man, the way that you are describing that is making me feel a lot of things. So just the fact that like to have you read my book is really special. So thank you for that, and to begin with. But your question, yeah, I mean, that would be the hope, right? I want us all to be able to be in the space where we're able to relish our bodies, and I feel like so much of the time what we're doing is either ignoring them or trying to force them to fit into something we think they should be, or using them recklessly, as opposed to just breathing in and out and feeling our lungs fill and putting our hands in the mud and watching them cake up on our palms and not worrying what the mud looks like to other people, right? So I don't know, how do we call that forward? I mean, like, I think telling our stories and getting to share the moment like we're having right now, and then sharing that with someone else, and remembering what that feels like, and the momentum behind that, I hope, creates more moments like that for people. I think that it's like a combination of an individual thing and the way we think about the world moment to moment. Like, I'm even thinking of like earlier today, being on the bed with my 4-month-old son, and he's like rolling around and like farting and he's just like slobbering all over his face, and I'm just like studying that, like, look at you, just like eating up this moment of being alive in your body. So I think part of it is like individual, but I think there's something we need to do for each other too, like creating that space for each other. That's important. It can't be something just that we intention for ourselves, but it's something to be mindful of for ourselves and to build for each other, and create space for each other. And I hope that the more that we share, I don't know, to me, storytelling is like my thing. So I hope that I can keep telling that story and sharing it, and calling it forth for us. Mostly, I just thank you for bringing that moment up for us right now, because that means a lot to me to hear you and the way you experienced that.
Yeah, so beautiful.
Right?
This is so Gustavo, you're supposed to cry. You're not supposed to make Rebekah cry. Remember, you changed our plan again. It's so lovely. I mean, little things. Rebekah, following you on Instagram and watching all of BJ's video, and one of which I forgot. BJ said, "I love my body," and that moment. An hour later, I had a call with my VA Anna, who designed all these beautiful artworks by my mom, like printed them on dresses. And I literally found myself say this for the last time, because all Chinese friends and family tell me like, Faye, your arms are so big from Taekwondo and swimming. Oh my God, they're so big in the documentary. And I'm like, I'm 120 pounds. I mean, how big are they really? And so I stopped I literally never wore tank tops for a long time. And then just in that moment, I just said, Anna, order 3 of them. I'm going to start wearing them. And if people ever comment on this again, I was like, you know what? I love my arms. They're mine, and you don't have to love them. So this is my new look now. And it felt, I can't believe, in like 37 years, it just felt so liberating to say that and to feel that way, and not to, to feel that I love my body. I love looking at it in front of the mirror, with or without clothing. It's just such a wonderful feeling. So thank you guys for like changing my life on that as well. So
I think that's right, Faye. I think that is powerful. Like, you see other people doing that, and it's like you didn't even realize that I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like,
go ahead.
See somebody else doing it, and you're like, oh, I could join that. Like, I could do that too. I maybe didn't even realize what the barrier was before, but when I see somebody else doing it, there is something really powerful with that. that is real. That is real. I felt that too.
It's awesome. I can't wait to do this again. And I love the fact that we're so open, and I'm really grateful. I feel so privileged, and really hope to bring more of these conversations forward. And yeah, so I'm sure Gustavo going to call me back after this and we can both cry on the phone. And wow, thank you so much. I will take us off the live session now. And thanks everyone for watching this live. And I'm sure we'll get more people watching this after as well. So